Have a seat, today's tea is bitter, but still sweeter than the price the villain in this story is about to pay. May's red ledger has just turned to a new page. Are you ready to claim justice with Reddit Revenge Tales? I looked my husband in the eye and said it. I cheated. I expected rage. I expected names. Instead, he gave me this calm, measured voice, like I was a problem he'd solved at work. I need time. And then, nothing. Since then, he's been too calm. He texts before he stays out late, polite as a stranger, like he's training himself not to need me. Tell me, this is he processing or preparing? Because his silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like a verdict. It's a countdown. The silence I'm living in has a sound to it. It's the soft buzz of Zach's phone. When he texts, I'll be out a bit. And the quiet click of the lock when he comes home and goes straight to the sink to wash his hands, like nothing happened. My name is Emma. I'm 37, and I teach preschool. All day I tie tiny shoes, wipe tears, sing the same songs on repeat, and tell little kids they're safe. Then I come home to a life that suddenly feels unsafe in a way I can't explain to a child. Zach is 39. He runs a bank branch. His world is meetings, numbers, rules, and keeping everything steady. We live in a middle-class apartment complex, the kind with thin walls and neighbors you recognize but don't really know. We have 2 kids, and our schedules barely touch. I'm up before sunrise. He is still working when dinner should happen. For months, a full family meal has felt like a rare event, not a routine. And now that I've confessed, the few moments we do share feel colder than being alone. Tonight, I hear him moving around in the living room, and I realize I'm more afraid of what he isn't saying than what he might say next. That fear doesn't come out of nowhere. It has been building quietly, like dust you stop noticing, until the light hits it. Just right. A few months back, on a weeknight after the kids were finally down, I was in our kitchen, standing barefoot on the cold tile with the dishwasher running in the background. Zach was in the other room on a work call, his voice calm and professional, the kind of voice he never seemed to have left for me by the end of the day. I remember staring at 2 plates I'd warmed up, and then let go cold. I sent him a text that should have been simple. "Are you coming to eat?" He replied a minute later. "Go ahead without me." I'm slammed. I did. Alone. Again. After that, it became a pattern. Little things added up. He stopped asking how my day went. I stopped offering. When I talked, I could feel his attention drifting, like he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. I told myself this is what marriage looks like when you're grown tired and raising kids. You keep the lights on, you keep the wheels turning, and you don't make everything a big deal. But one night, later that week, I caught myself holding my phone longer than I needed to, scrolling for no reason, waiting for something to fill the quiet. And I didn't know yet that I was about to find it. It was the first time I noticed how quiet our life had gotten, and how loud it felt inside my body. I was in the living room folding the kids' laundry with the dryer still warm and the TV off. The only sound was the steady hum of the air vent, and the little click of the hallway light switch. When Zach moved around, he was in his home office, with the door half closed, sitting at his desk the way he sits at work, shoulders forward, phone face down beside his laptop, like it was all business and no life. I heard him on a call, using that professional voice that always seems to show up on time for everyone else. I tried, anyway. I stood at the doorway and told him about one of my preschoolers who cried so hard she hiccuped, and how I finally got her to laugh. He didn't turn around. He just said, "That's good, Em. I'm in the middle of something. When he finally stepped out, he glanced at the clock and said, "I have to be up early. I'm going to bed. No argument, no affection, just a shutdown that made me feel invisible." I stood there holding a tiny t-shirt, realizing I was starting to live beside my husband instead of with him. And that emptiness was about to find a place to land. That emptiness didn't wait. Another night, not long after Zach was out for a bank event again, and the apartment felt too still. I had just finished wiping the counters and checking on the kids, and I was sitting at the edge of our bed with my phone in my hand, screen dimmed like I didn't want the light to judge me. The ceiling fan made that soft, rhythmic sound, and I kept telling myself I was only going to scroll for a minute. I opened Reddit. I didn't even search that hard. The kind of posts I used to skim suddenly felt like they were written for me. Married, tired, lonely in a house full of people. My thumb moved faster than my conscience. I left one comment, then another. A message came in almost immediately from a stranger. "You sound like you're carrying a lot. Are you okay?" I should have closed the app. I should have put the phone down and gone to sleep. Instead, I typed back, "I'm fine. Just a long day." And when he replied right away, warm and curious, I felt that dangerous rush of being seen. Zach texted running late, and I stared at his name on my screen, like it belonged to someone else's life. Then I went back to the stranger. Going back to the stranger felt like taking a sip of something I knew would burn, but I did it anyway. That same night, I stayed propped against my pillows, while the apartment settled into its usual quiet. My phone kept lighting up in my hand, and I kept telling myself I was only answering, because it was easier than staring at the ceiling and feeling ignored. At first, it sounded harmless. He asked about my day. He remembered details I mentioned once. He said things like, "You deserve to feel appreciated," and it hit me in the exact sore spot I had been pretending wasn't there. I started checking my phone before I checked the baby monitor. I started typing with my brightness turned low, like dimming the screen could dim the guilt. The next day and then the next, it became a rhythm. If Zach was late, I was online. If Zach was quiet, I was louder with someone who wasn't real to my life. I began deleting messages not because he asked me to, but because I didn't want to see myself doing it. And then one night Zach walked in earlier than usual. My thumb froze because I heard the key. Not a text. Not a warning. The actual key in our lock. It was late one weeknight, and I was sitting on the edge of our bed in the dim light, phone in my hand screen turned down. Like that made me less guilty. Zach stepped into the apartment with his jacket still on, and I felt my whole body go hot and cold at the same time. He didn't catch me in some dramatic way. He just saw me sitting there too still, and he paused. "Are the kids asleep?" he asked, normal voice, normal face. I swallowed and said yes. I was just scrolling. My hand moved on its own. I flipped the phone face down against the comforter like it was a reflex. Zach walked past me to the bathroom and turned on the sink. The water ran. Too long. When he came back out, he looked at me for a second and said, "I'm going to check on them." I stood in the hallway listening to his footsteps, and I realized something sharp. He didn't accuse me. He didn't ask. He just started moving through the house like he was counting what mattered. And I hated myself for feeling relieved. That key sound stayed with me, and it changed how I moved. Another evening not long after, Zach was out again, and the apartment had that after-bedtime stillness that can feel like relief or danger, depending on what you are hiding. I took my phone into the bathroom and locked the door, but instead of running the faucet, I turned on the shower for a few seconds, and then shut it off just enough steam and sound to make it seem normal if anyone asked why I was in there. The exhaust fan rattled overhead, and the mirror started to haze. I told myself I just needed a minute. Then the message thread lit up, and I opened it before I could talk myself out of it. I kept the brightness low thumb moving fast heart, moving faster. When a notification came in, my stomach jumped like I had been caught. Through the wall I could hear the kid's white noise shift slightly, that soft mechanical change that makes you listen, even when you do not want to. I stared at the locked doorknob like it could save me. Nobody knocked, nobody interrupted. And in that empty space, I did not stop. I got quieter. I got better at being someone I did not recognize. After that, I started moving through my own home like I was sneaking around a stranger's house. The next day, I did the normal things on autopilot. I taught preschool, smiled on command, wiped little faces, praised artwork I barely saw. In the pickup line, I chatted with other parents, like my life was still solid. Then I came home and played the part I was supposed to play. I warmed up leftovers. I asked the kids about their day. I answered Zach's texts like a responsible wife. Dinner is in the fridge. They are asleep. But the second I had a gap, I vanished. I took my phone into the bathroom and closed the door. I turned on the faucet. I flushed for no reason if I heard footsteps in the hall. I kept a hand towel ready so I could wipe my face fast if my eyes looked glassy. I started checking the lock twice. The worst part was how easy it became. I was not chasing love. I was chasing relief. And relief is the kind of thing you can justify until you wake up and realize you are living two lives in one body. Living two lives in one body changes how you see everything, especially the person sleeping on the other side of the wall. Not long after I started disappearing into the bathroom, I noticed Zach changing too, but not in a way I could call out without sounding paranoid. It was small things. He stopped asking me open-ended questions at night, not because he did not care, but because he seemed determined not to start anything in front of the kids. One evening I was in the kitchen rinsing sippy cups, while the microwave beeped behind me. Zach came out of his home office phone in his hand and went straight to the kids' backpacks by the door. He checked their folders, signed a form lined up shoes like he was setting the house for the morning shift. When I said, "Do you want to talk?" he looked at me and answered like he had practiced it. I want to stay calm. I need time to think clearly. Then he told me he would be out late again, and he texted me the address of where he would be like I was a coworker who needed a status update. That kind of politeness is not comfort. It is distance with good manners. And that distance made my secret feel less like a mistake, and more like something I could keep doing. That I need time kept looping in my head until it started sounding like permission. Monday afternoon after my shift, I was still in the preschool parking lot, sitting in my car with the engine off. The sun was low enough to glare off the windshield, and the seatbelt buckle clicked softly against the console every time I shifted. I was alone, door-locked phone in my lap, staring at a text thread I should have deleted. He had suggested meeting in person, casual, just coffee. I told myself it was not cheating if it was only talking. I told Zach I have a parent meeting that ran late. The lie came out too smoothly. My hands were steady when I sent it, which scares me now more than anything. I drove to a shopping plaza I had been to 100 times for normal errands. I parked far from the entrance and sat there for 10 minutes watching people push carts, like their lives were simple. Then I opened my door, stepped out and walked toward the coffee shop. The bell over the door rang when I went in. And when I saw him stand up smiling like he already knew me, I realized I had crossed a line I could not uncross. The bell over the coffee shop door followed me home like a bad scent you cannot wash out. Later that night I rode the elevator up with my hood pulled forward, staring at the floor numbers as they blinked past, praying I would step into my apartment and somehow be the same wife I had been that morning. When I opened the door, the kids' cartoon theme song was playing faintly from a tablet in their room, and the living room smelled like microwave popcorn. Everything looked normal. I was the only thing that wasn't. I slipped into the closet and changed fast, not because I needed to, but because it felt like shedding evidence. My shoes went into the back corner. My phone went face down in my purse. Then I walked out like I had earned the right to be there. Zach was on the floor by the coffee table with one of the kids' backpacks open, pulling out a crumpled worksheet. He did not look up right away. He just said, "You got home later than usual." His voice stayed level, and that calm felt like pressure. "I had a parent meeting," I said. I hated how quickly it came out. I hated how believable it sounded. Zach glanced up, nodded once, and went back to finding a missing pencil, like he was choosing the kids over the questions. That should have been mercy. It felt like a door closing quietly. That quiet nod gave me the worst kind of confidence. The next time Zach was gone overnight for work, I moved through our evening like I was on a timer. I fed the kids cleaned up, read 2 stories instead of 1, and tucked them in with extra patience like good motherhood could balance bad choices. When their room finally went silent, I stood in the hallway listening for any sound that would pull me back to myself. Nothing did. I went into our bedroom and picked up my phone like it weighed nothing. The messages were waiting. The attention was waiting. And instead of feeling scared, I felt organized. That is the part that makes me sick now. I checked the clock, checked the lock, and texted back like I had earned this. I did not bring him into my home. I did not want that. I told myself I was still a decent person because I had limits. So I met him outside my real life. I left the apartment, walked fast to my car, and drove with the radio off. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my stomach rolled the whole way. When I got back, I slipped my shoes off at the door, padded past the kids' room, and stood in the dark kitchen breathing hard. I stared at the sink and thought, I am going to have to live with this. And I knew I would do it again. Standing in that dark kitchen, breathing hard, I realized I wasn't just doing something wrong. I was building a routine around it. Over the next couple weeks, the lies stopped feeling like choices and started feeling like maintenance. I would tuck the kids in, kiss their foreheads, and then my brain would shift into a different gear. The one that watches the clock and listens for the elevator outside our door. On a weeknight, I was in our bedroom with the closet door cracked open, changing out of my work clothes, while my phone buzzed on the dresser. Zach had texted that he might be late again, and instead of feeling disappointed, I felt a sick kind of relief. I replied, "Okay," like a normal wife, then turned my brightness down and went right back to the other thread. I got careful in small ways that add up. I stopped leaving my phone on the coffee table. I started taking calls only behind closed doors. If Zach asked where I was, I always had a simple answer, ready that sounded like my real life. I stayed to clean up. I was catching up on paperwork, and the scariest part was how quickly my voice learned to sound calm while I was doing it. After weeks of smoothing over details, it only took one early arrival to crack the whole thing open. One evening I was in the hallway outside the kids' room, crouched down to pick up a stuffed animal I had tripped over. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out before I thought screen angled toward my chest like a habit. The apartment was quiet enough to hear the dryer finish its cycle in the laundry nook, that final soft thump, then silence. Then the front door opened. Not a text. Not a warning. The real door. My heart kicked hard. I shoved my phone into my sweatshirt pocket and stood up too fast, knocking my elbow against the wall. Zach's footsteps came down the hall steady, and I could smell the cold air on his jacket, like he had just come in from outside. He stopped when he saw me. "Emma, what are you doing?" he asked in normal voice, but his eyes were sharper than his tone. "I was just cleaning up," I said, and the lie felt thin in my mouth. He looked at my pocket. He didn't reach for it. He didn't raise his voice. He just asked, "Why do you look like you're hiding?" I stepped sideways without thinking, putting my body between him and the kid's door, blocking a view that wasn't even there. Zach held my gaze for a long second, then walked past me and picked up the stuffed animal, placing it back on the bed like he was choosing peace over proof. And as he shut their door softly, I knew I had just passed the point where a small mistake stays small. When Zach chose peace that night, I used it. Like cover. The week after Christmas, I told myself I was running out to grab something we needed for the kids. It was early evening, and I was standing in the entryway with my hand on the doorknob coat, half on keys already threaded between my fingers. Zach was down the hall in his home office door, mostly closed voice low on a call. I could hear the kids laughing at something in their room, that bright sound that should have kept me home. I called out, "I'm going to the store real quick." My voice sounded normal, which made me feel worse. Zach answered from his office without stepping out. "Okay, drive safe. No suspicion. No questions." That made it easier, and that is the sickest part. I pulled the door open, stepped into the hallway and let it close behind me. The latch clicked like a decision. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with both hands clamped on the wheel, staring at my wedding ring like it belonged to someone else. I drove somewhere I should not have gone. I did something I cannot dress up with nicer words. When I came back, I rode the elevator up. With my throat tight, wiped my palms on my jeans before I touched our door, and walked into my own home like I was breaking in. I thought the guilt would scare me straight. Instead, it made me reckless in my head and careful in my body. The next day I moved through my classroom like I was underwater. I smiled at toddlers, sang the songs, tied the shoes, and my hands kept working. Even while my mind replayed one ugly truth, I crossed a line, and I cannot uncross it. That night, when the apartment was finally quiet, I stood at the sink and stared at the dish soap, like it was the only real thing in the room. Zach was in the shower. The water ran. I listened to it and felt my stomach twist. I kept thinking if he ever finds out from someone else, I will deserve whatever happens. That thought followed me into bed. Zach lay beside me, facing away, breathing steady. I wanted to touch his shoulder. I didn't. I wanted to tell him everything, and also never speak again. I kept my phone across the room like distance could fix what I did. Around midnight, I got up and walked into the hallway, just to look at the kids sleeping, their faces soft and unbothered. I stood there longer than I should have. In the dark, I realized I was not afraid of losing my marriage in some dramatic moment. I was afraid of losing it in silence, and I knew I was running out of time. I was running out of time, and I could feel it in my body like a fever you cannot sweat out. The next Saturday night, I waited until the kids were asleep, and the apartment had settled into that thin, familiar quiet. I was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a glass of water I never drank. Zach came out of his home office and stood a few feet from me, not close enough to touch close enough to hear the shake in my voice if it showed. The refrigerator hummed behind us, like it was trying to pretend this was normal. I said his name once, and he looked at me. I told him I had been talking to strangers online. I told him it escalated, and I told him there was a physical mistake at the end of December that I could not undo. I did not give him graphic details, but I did not hide the truth. My hands moved before my courage did. I placed my phone on the counter and slid it toward him. I said, "You can look. You can ask. I will answer." Zach blinked hard, like he was trying not to break in front of me. Then he asked, "Who was it, and when did this start?" And when I answered, something in his face went quiet in a way I will never forget. That look on Zach's face did not turn into shouting. It turned into a new kind of calm, and it followed me into the next day like a shadow. Sunday morning I was in the kitchen packing lunches out of habit, even though it was the weekend just needing my hands to do something. Zach was in the living room sitting on the edge of the couch with his phone in one hand, and the TV off. The only sound was the crinkle of bread bags, and the soft tap of my knife on the cutting board. He did not bring it up again. He did not ask for more details. He did not say the mean things I deserved to hear. When I tried to speak, he lifted his eyes and said I need time and space. I am not going to explode. I am going to think. His voice was steady, almost polite, like he was forcing himself to stay inside a set of rules. Then he did something that felt worse than anger. He started leaving more. Not sneaking, not disappearing, but texting first. I will be out for a bit. I will be back later. Always a heads up. Always calm. I stood at the window watching the parking lot, realizing he was acting like a man practicing a life that did not include me, and I could not tell which day he would finally say the word I was waiting for. I kept seeing him walk away calm like he had already decided. The next day it was a weeknight, and I was at the dining table with the kids' school folders spread out, signing a permission slip with a pen that kept slipping in my sweaty fingers. Zach was in the living room, not sitting, not pacing, just standing by the window with his phone in his hand, looking out at the parking lot like he was measuring distance. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's door shut and the sound echoed too loudly in our thin, walled building. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't cruel. He was organized in a way that felt surgical. He asked me, calm as ever, "Which days can you handle mornings?" He said it like a scheduling question, but it landed like a separation plan. I answered because the question was about our children, and I could not afford to fall apart in front of them. When the kids finally ran to their room, Zach lowered his voice. I am going to keep things stable for them. That is non-negotiable. Then he put his phone down, picked up his keys, and said I will be back later. He didn't sneak. He didn't disappear. He gave me a heads up the way you do when you are no longer asking permission, only giving notice. I watched him leave and realized he wasn't just taking space. He was building a life that could run without me. His plan felt like a verdict, and it made my skin itch with panic. Later that night, the apartment was dim except for the stove light, and I was at the sink rinsing a cup just to have something to do. Zach stood near the hallway jacket, half on checking his phone like he was timing his escape. The faucet ran steady and cold, and I heard my own voice come out sharper than I meant it to. I need you to say something, I said. I cannot live with polite silence. If you are furious, be furious. Zach looked at me, and for a second I thought he might finally explode. Instead, he took a slow breath and replied, I am angry. I am also trying to keep this house from turning into a battlefield. I stepped closer, too close, and I hated how desperate I sounded. I almost wish you would yell. I deserve it. He shook his head once. Yelling would make you feel punished. It would not make you safe. It would not make the kids safe. Then he opened the front door, paused with his hand on the knob, and added, I will talk when I can do it without hurting them. The door clicked shut. I stood there, staring at the running water, realizing he was not withholding emotion. He was withholding access. The click of that door stayed in my chest, like a bruise. Later that week, on a quiet evening, I was in our kitchen alone, standing in socks on the cold tile with the overhead light too bright. Zach's keys weren't in the bowl by the door, and the only sound was the refrigerator cycling on and off. When I reached for the mail, my fingers stopped on a thick envelope, with Zach's name printed clean and centered. No handwritten note, no smiley stamp, just a law firm return address that looked expensive. I didn't open it right away. I held it like it could bite. Then I did the worst thing, and the most human thing. I slid my nail under the flap and tore it open. The paper inside wasn't a divorce filing. It was informational. Neat headings, phrases like consultation and options, the kind of language that turns a marriage into a file. My stomach dropped so hard. I had to grip the counter. When Zach came in, I blocked the envelope with my forearm like a teenager hiding contraband. He saw it anyway. I asked, "Is this what you're doing?" He set his phone down and said, calm and careful, I needed information. That's all. And the way he said information felt like the first shovel of dirt. That word information made me realize Zach had been thinking in survival terms, while I was drowning in emotion. The next day, we finally had a few minutes alone in the living room, after the kids went to bed. The hallway light was on, and I could hear the neighbor's TV through the wall, some laugh track that felt like a cruel joke. Zach sat in the armchair with his hands, clasped eyes fixed on a spot on the carpet, like he was choosing his words the way he chooses numbers at work. I said I want you to be honest. If you're done, say you're done. My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. He looked up, and for the first time since my confession, his calm slipped just enough to show something underneath it. You keep asking me to yell, he said. I'm not doing that. Why? I asked. Zach swallowed, because when I was a kid, I watched a house turn into a war zone over cheating. Screaming, slamming doors, days where nobody ate. I promised myself my kids would never live in that. He rubbed his forehead once hard, like the memory still hurt. So yes, I am angry. I am also trying to keep this home safe. I sat there stunned, realizing his silence wasn't softness. It was control, and if he was controlling this much, it meant he was close to a decision. After he told me why he refuses to explode, my excuses stopped sounding like explanations and started sounding like noise. The next evening after the kids were asleep, we didn't talk in the kitchen. We talked in the entryway near the shoe rack, like neither of us wanted to settle into comfort while we were still in crisis. The hallway light outside our door leaked in through the peephole, a tiny dot on the wall that made the space feel exposed. Zach stood with his back near the coat hooks, arms loose at his sides, face tight but steady. I stood a few steps away, close enough to be heard, far enough to respect what he asked for. I am not asking you to forgive me tonight, I said. I am asking you to let me do this without games. I told him I had cut off contact completely, and that I would not keep secrets on my phone. I said it plainly, like an adult, not like someone bargaining for relief. Zach listened, then replied, I need consistency. No chasing me down when I walk out, no speeches at midnight. If I ask a question, I want the real answer. I nodded and did not negotiate. Okay, I said. If you need space, you will get space. If you need truth, you will get truth. He picked up his keys, paused, and set them back down. It was small, but it was something, and it made me realize the next proof had to be concrete, not emotional. That tiny movement with his keys stayed in my mind all day like a thread I did not want to snap. Later that week after bedtime, I sat alone at the dining table with the apartment quiet except for the air conditioner clicking on and off. My phone was in another room. I did not need it anymore to tell the truth. I wrote a letter in plain language, the kind you cannot talk your way out of. Dates where I could remember them, what happened in what order, what I lied about and what I did to cover it. No extra details that would stain his brain forever. But nothing softened to protect my pride. When Zach came out of his home office, I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. He flinched at the sound, and I hated that I could still make him tense. I held the pages with both hands and said, "This is the timeline. This is what you deserve to know." I walked around the table and placed it in front of him, then slid my phone beside it like a confession you can hold. Zach did not reach for either one right away. He just stared at the paper, and I realized the next words out of his mouth could change everything. Zach stared at the paper like it was heavier than it looked. The next moment he finally reached for it, not gently, just flat-palmed, pulling it closer until the top page lined up with the edge of the table. We were still in the dining area late at night, the apartment quiet except for the air conditioner clicking and the faint buzz of the fridge. I stood across from him with my hands clasped so tight my knuckles hurt, waiting for rage that never came. He read in silence for what felt like forever, then set the pages down and slid my phone away from him with 2 fingers, like it was contaminated. He looked up and asked, "Is there anything else you have not told me?" I swallowed and said no. This is it. He did not accept that answer for free. He asked, "Have you cut it off completely, or am I going to find another message next week I cut it off?" I said, and forced myself to hold his eyes. Then he leaned forward, voice low and steady. "If I decide I am done, what happens to the kids? Tell me the real plan, not the emotional one." And I realized he wasn't chasing my tears. He was testing my truth. His last question hung in the air long after I answered it. Later that night, I was in our bedroom with the door pulled almost closed, sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, listening to the refrigerator cycle and the distant thud of footsteps, when Zach shifted on the couch. The only light came from the hallway nightlight, a thin stripe under the door, that made the room feel smaller. I did not text anyone. I did not reach for my phone. I just sat there, hands in my lap, trying to breathe like a normal person, while my life sat in 2 separate rooms. Every few minutes I heard the couch springs creak, then silence again, like even his body was trying not to make a scene. At some point, I got up and walked to the kids' room. I stood there and watched them sleep steady and innocent, one blanket half kicked off one stuffed animal on the floor. I pulled the blanket up, picked up the toy, and my throat tightened so hard it hurt. When I walked back down the hall, Zach was still awake. Still, I could tell, because the couch made that small shift sound again like he was turning away from me without looking. And in that moment, I understood something brutal. I wasn't waiting for him to say, "Divorce." I was waiting for him to stop seeing me as family. That fear of him no longer seeing me as family followed me into the next morning. Early the next day, I was in the elevator with the kids watching the floor numbers change, while one of them swung a backpack against my leg, thump, 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 like the building was counting seconds. When we stepped out into the lobby, Zach was already there, holding the door open, dressed for work. Face neutral. He didn't smile at me. He didn't glare either. He just made sure the kids got through first. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. Zach crouched to tie a shoelace, and his voice softened. Only for them. "Let's go. We're going to be on time. Then he stood up and looked at me like we were coworkers running a shared project. "Can you do pickup today?" "I have a meeting. I cannot move." I said yes, because it was the only honest thing I had left. In the parking lot, we both reached for the same backpack strap, and our fingers brushed. He pulled his hand back quickly, like the contact surprised him, like his body was ahead of his heart. He walked the kids to the car, buckled them in, and closed the door with a gentle push. Then he turned toward me and said, "Tonight, we need to talk about next month." And the way he said next month made it clear we weren't discussing feelings. We were discussing outcomes. When he said next month, my stomach tightened the way it does before a hard meeting at work. That evening after bedtime, we sat in the living room with the TV off, one lamp on, and the apartment so quiet I could hear the ice maker drop cubes in the freezer. Zach sat on the far end of the couch, elbows on his knees, looking straight ahead like he was choosing words that would not damage the kids through the walls. I sat in the chair across from him, hands folded, trying not to beg. He spoke first. "I am giving this 30 days, he said. "Not because I am okay. Because I need to see what consistency looks like. I need to see if your truth stays true." I swallowed and asked, "What does that mean day to day?" "It means no chasing me for comfort," he said. "No emotional speeches in front of the kids. No surprises. If I ask a question, you answer it. If I need space, you respect it." I nodded, and my voice came out steady, even though my chest hurt. "I will do that." Zach stood up, picked up his phone, and said, "At the end of 30 days, I decide what I can live with." He walked down the hall, and I stayed sitting where I was realizing I had just been given a countdown. Not a promise. 30 days is not a second chance. It is a test. You do not get to grade yourself. The morning after Zach said it, I stood at the sink washing the same cups I always wash, listening to the same building sounds through the wall. And it hit me how ordinary consequences look when they finally arrive. No screaming, no dramatic exit. Just a husband who now treats love like something that has to be verified. Here is what I learned the hard way. Loneliness inside a marriage is real, but it is not permission. Being tired, unseen, and overwhelmed does not erase the damage you choose to cause. If you are the one who broke trust, your job is not to demand comfort from the person you hurt. Your job is to tell the whole truth. Once stop performing remorse and start living in a way that can be checked. Consistency is louder than apologies. If you are the one who was betrayed, silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is safety. Sometimes it is a parent choosing not to traumatize the kids with adult chaos. You get to protect your peace. You get to gather information. You get to decide what you can live with. And if you are listening to this with your own kitchen light on, wondering what comes next, ask yourself one honest question. Are you building a life that is safe to come home to? Or are you quietly preparing to leave it? All right. Let May be painfully clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. And it showed up fast. A stranger asked you something stupid at a bar, you said no, and Mark turned you from wife to suspect. That's red flag number 1, suspicion. Without proof. Then he started the classic toxic combo, moving the goalpost, demanding the truth after you already gave it, and treating your calm as evidence. That's not concern. That's control wearing a suit. And when someone blocks the exit, when your "I need air" becomes "why are you running?" That's not love. That's a power test. The moment he rewrote the story, you pushed me, you escalated. That's gaslighting 1. Oh, 1. Not loud, not messy, just cold, tidy cruelty. So here's your takeaway straight up: your no is a full sentence. You don't audition for basic respect. You don't negotiate reality with someone who benefits from you doubting yourself. If you're hearing this and your stomach drops, trust that. Red flags don't get greener with time. To the villain of this story, karma doesn't need your permission. It just keeps receipts. And to you, sweetheart, this debt may clears it. But remember, these eyes are always watching. Don't let your name end up on May's blacklist next episode. Hit subscribe, because around here, justice doesn't show up late. It shows up ready. A final note from the library. While these stories find their roots in the halls of Reddit, they are artistically reimagined to speak to the heart. Any likeness to reality is mere coincidence. The emotions, however, are very real. Walk with empathy and let justice lead the way. Thank you for watching.